some time we've seen the financial headwinds coming. In January, first revenue downgrade from 2017 became very clear. The state's financial picture is changing. With that in mind, along with the reductions in federal funding, as well as the president's use of tariffs, which has caused much more inflation, my team knew we had needed to be disciplined on building a budget that reflected our priorities as well as our fiscal reality. This wasn't easy, especially knowing rising costs across the board were affecting everyday Vermonters' business. But it was necessary because if we didn't make those difficult decisions, taxpayers would be on the hook to pay more. But the budget that I presented to the legislature lived within its means without raising taxes or new revenue to cover the costs. Because Vermont has been clear, they've had enough. They know we're already one of the highest tax states, and many simply can't afford to pay anymore. As you know, we also included much needed property tax relief. Again, because Vermonters are already struggling to make ends meet. And I can assure you, I hear about the affordability concern from Vermonters almost every day. So I'm going to read a letter that we received every single day. My name is Brian. I'm 33 years old, born and raised in Vermont. I grew up in Richmond, St. George, graduated in 2010. Vermont has always been home. I spent 10 years as an educator in Vermont and was fortunate enough to be a Fulbright recipient. I believe deeply in public service. I wanted to build my life. I'm now leaving Vermont, and both my parents are leaving as well. This decision has been building for years. Vermont was recently ranked among the worst states for economic development, and I feel that reality every day. About 2/3 of the friends I grew up with have already left the state, mostly for economic reasons, because they could not find work in their fields. I never expected to be joining them. I have a 3-year-old son, and I wanted him to grow up in a place where he has a real chance financially. That is becoming harder to imagine. On a roughly $350,000 home in St. Albans, my property taxes have increased by about $3,000 over the past 5 years. I'm now paying close to $750 per month just in property taxes alone. Running a small business here has also become unrealistic. Affordable warehouse space is nearly impossible to find, and building is unaffordable when property taxes are factored in. Healthcare costs are among the highest in the nation and add constant pressure for working families and small business owners. My dad is a lifelong Vermonter who has always worked full-time, barely scraped by. At this point, I cannot afford heating oil. I have no choice but to vote. I know there have been efforts to hold fuel suppliers accountable, but the reality of the ground is that gasoline and diesel remain high per month. We don't see it. Plattsburgh and New Hampshire are often 40 cents cheaper per gallon. Difference matters when people are already stretched thin. I am not leaving. I failed to stop caring about Vermont. I'm leaving because I want a stable future for my family. That has become increasingly hard to find. I wanted you to hear that directly from someone who proved that. Apparently, the majority of House members have been hearing something different from their constituents. They're proposing to increase property taxes by an average of 7%. I'm also concerned about the lack of progress on educational reform, because long-term structural change is not on the right track here at the State House. If we want to prevent the cost of education from continuing to rise by hundreds of millions of dollars year after year, we must follow through on the goals of Act 73, the law the legislature passed last session, so we can transform our education system without having for more, which, as most of us know, not sustainable. Legislators must dig deep, find the courage to act. Because as I've said since January, we'll sign a spending bill that doesn't follow through on the transformation. On the budget, most of our concern is almost the 20 million additional general fund spending, which is counterintuitive considering revenue downgrade last 3 months ago. Now it's true, there are a lot of great things happening here in Vermont, but we can't say yes for everything at this expense of taxpayers. And there are other areas the House doesn't appropriately address, including diverting IT funds, having funding for a reading program so our kids can get back being the most elite in the nation, right in the middle of the pack, adding guardrails to appropriations, like a card fall through on Act 73, and failing to address the long-term fund shortfall, despite my team proposing solutions would address each of these areas. Now that the House has passed their version of the budget, we've expressed our concerns to the Senate Appropriations Committee. Look forward to working with them in the coming weeks to pass something that reflects the needs of Vermonters while balancing this reality. So with that, I'll turn it over to Secretary Fire.
Thank you, Governor. The budget we delivered to the legislature in January reflected some difficult but intentional decisions. And while we appreciate the many areas of agreement with the House passed version, notably the Vermont Housing Improvement Program, VHIP, has been added to the base budget after years of discussion. Our primary concerns are focused in 5 areas. First, property taxes. As the governor said, Vermonters have asked us to fix the education system, though they're not faced with property tax increases year after year with no end in sight. Act 73, last year's education transformation bill, made progress and established the roadmap that we need to follow. But in the meantime, we need to do our part to help taxpayers, which is why the governor included $105 million in his budget to provide as much relief as we could. Unfortunately, the House is spreading that amount across 2 years, providing far less relief without knowing what we'll have or what we'll need to help Vermonters next year. And as the governor has said, people need relief now. They can't wait. And to follow through on Act 73, the Agency of Education has worked to strengthen and realign its team so it can more effectively support school districts and teachers across the state. Unfortunately, the House passed budget undermines their ability to do this by adding new guardrails to AOE funding appropriated just last year. Our leaders and teams in each agency and department are the subject matter experts, our boots on the ground, carrying out the work of state government every day. It's essentially, we are allowed to do that in the best interest of Vermonters. We are asking the Senate to reverse the decision made by the House. Another area of concern is the increase in spending in both one-time and base general fund expenditures. The House budget adds almost $11 million in one-time, $7 million in base general fund spending above the governor's proposed budget. Though the House indicated that their all funds budget is $1 million less than the governor's budget, that is primarily a reflection of almost $30 million lower education spending because of a more recent school budget information post-town meeting. The House budget will cost more, not less, than the governor's proposal. When building the governor's budget, we reviewed hundreds of one-time and base requests and had to make hard budgetary decisions. Working with our agencies and departments, the governor's proposed budget prioritized the areas of greatest need. Saying no is hard, but it's essential to making sure we live within Vermonters' means. The House budget includes 40 one-time appropriations, not including a half a dozen others from other bills. as compared to only 10 in the governor's recommended budget. This increased level of spending is risky in a time of extreme asset market volatility, federal funding vulnerabilities, and uncertain state revenues. As we saw in the summer and winter revenue forecasts, transportation fund continues to face declining revenues. The governor's budget included language to allow the T fund to retain motor vehicle purchase and use tax phased in over 5 years. We need to establish this as a multi-year transition, but the House removed the governor's language to make this permanent shift. We asked the Senate to join the administration in making a commitment to long-term structural reforms in the T fund so we can maintain our transportation infrastructure. The final area of concern is the House's decision to divert $9.5 million of IT modernization fund interest, which Secretary Riley Hughes will talk more about in a moment. We believe there is a path forward for the budget and hope the Senate will work with us to understand our concerns and make the necessary changes. Budgeting in times of uncertainty and tighter revenue is never easy, but I am hopeful we can work together to deliver a budget that follows through on the affordability needs of Vermonters. With that, I'll hand it over to Secretary Riley. Thank you, Secretary. Thank you, Governor. The IT Modernization Fund was created to solve a very real problem. Vermont's technology systems are aging. They're costly, they're holding back services to Vermonters. This fund is how we break that cycle. It's not extra money. It's a long-term solution that lets us modernize responsibly and avoid bigger costs down the road. We're already seeing the return on this approach. The DMV modernization project has delivered real, tangible benefits for Vermonters. Faster service, more online options, fewer bottlenecks, better reliability, and stronger security. That's what modernization looks like when it's invested steadily and planned ahead. Shorter waits, simpler transactions, and better service statewide. There's more on the way. Later this summer, we will be releasing the modern unemployment insurance system. It's going to make it faster and easier for workers to get benefits, to give employers clearer tools and reporting, improve customer support, and strengthen program integrity for the Vermont Department of Labor and Vermonters. It's exactly the kind of upgrade that Vermonters are expecting, and it depends on a stable, dedicated fund. That's why the proposal to sweep $9.54 million interest is so concerning. The interest is not incidental. It's part of the model that makes this fund sustainable. It's what allows the fund to grow and keep pace with rising technology costs. If we remove it, we turn a long-term investment strategy into a short-term funding source, something this fund was never intended to be. And that puts us right back on the path that created the problem in the first place: delayed upgrades, failing systems, and higher costs later. We all know how this works when you plan ahead. You avoid emergencies. A dedicated fund lets the state plan instead of react, buy smarter instead of fast. Modern systems are cheaper to maintain, they're more efficient for staff, and they're easier to improve over time. Without consistent funding, projects stall, and delays always increase costs. Steady investments now prevent much larger expenses later. This is not technology for technology's sake. Technology is the backbone of nearly every state program, from healthcare to public safety to benefits delivery. The value reaches every Vermonter. So when a renewal of a license is done, an application of a benefits, starting a business, paying taxes, access to public records, you're relying on these systems. Removing the fund's interest, you remove value from Vermonters just as the benefits are taking hold. There's a broader precedence as well. This fund was created for long-term investment. Diverting its resources signals that dedicated funds can be repurposed for short-term needs. That erodes our ability to plan, invest, and maintain trust in how we steward taxpayer dollars. We respect the tough choices before legislature, and we're committed to working together. But we strongly believe this decision should be reconsidered. Preserving the fund's interest preserves a model that is delivering better service at a lower term cost, from DMV improvements already serving Vermonters to the unemployment insurance system arriving late this summer, and even to the ERP project that is recently underway. Investing in technology is investing in Vermont's ability to serve people today and into the future. So let's protect the momentum, keep our systems reliable, our services responsive, and our finances responsible. Thank you, Governor.
Thank you, Denise. We'll open up the questions.
I guess in terms of these budget conversations we're having, I'm hearing you say that for this technological fund, you don't want to use money on short term. But in terms of the $5 million for property, that's a short term. The House has said actually spread them out, right, in order to have available. So
We're not having any more or any less, but I think we need to do more right now. Prevent a 7% increase in property taxes after all the increase we've had over the last number of years. Not a time to just now and half then. It's still too. So from my perspective, I just need to take the leap right now. Not something the next. Well, if we don't do something now, we're going to put a lot of risk.
well, yeah, I think what I was also getting at was if we like we do the buy down again this year higher, right? So what is the kind of step
Excellent.
forward for this? Okay.
That's it. I mean, we have to make structural changes. I think you hit the nail on the head. Right? If we don't do anything, it's going to keep growing. That's what we've seen over the last few years. That's why over the last 10 years, we've asked the legislature to do a number of things, whether it's in insurance, whether it's in different times of having school budgets, all kinds of different things over the years. They projected every single one of them. So this is what we're in. This is the mess we create together. I mean, they overrode a lot of budgets that had a lot of solutions in them. So from my standpoint, where do we go from here? And I believe that we need to follow through on what we promised last year for that 73. Do the tough work. It's not easy, but we have to do it in order to be stronger in the future, economically, because this isn't going to sell.
Would you consider going into one of the committees? I know you've engaged with leadership, but would you consider engaging with rank and file lawmakers face to face?
I have engaged with leadership. Those are the folks that make the decision. So, I mean, they should be able to, if they agree, they should be able to convince their members to do the same. They should see the same thing that we're seeing.
From where you sit, what are the big sticking? I mean, there's a lot of sticking points, but I mean, what do you see as some of the big issues that still need to be smoothed out to meet the goals of access?
I guess having a realistic map for starters. I think we have to do that. And that's what we said we're not. So again, I'm appreciative if the House is going to move forward with any map at this point. I'm appreciative of that. There won't be something I don't imagine I accept, but at least the process is moving forward. Then if the Senate moves with their, I don't think that's anything that I can accept, but at least they're moving forward. And then we'll get down to the conference committees and hopefully have something that Vermonters be able to live with.
Leaders of both the House and the Senate say it's not that they're not moving forward, that's because they don't want to. It's because they don't have the votes.
Right.
So, how do you overcome that reality?
Well, again, if we end up in the same position, ended up in years past with increasing property taxes that dysfunction won't allow us to fix, the voters will decide what to do with that.
I talked to the pro tem yesterday, he said, look, the promise of Act 73 has a it's a big district, it's the foundation. We're prepared to move forward to that foundation forward with or without us. Why not just go directly?
Because it's not gonna fix the structural problems within the system. Like that will, in some respects, just punish some districts. You know, because when you have so many schools, and kids at the end of the day, because it's a smaller amount of money without the efficiencies that have come along with the restructuring.
Related to the more general economic and affordability issues that you talked about in this press conference, Vermont Democratic Party had a press conference a few weeks ago where they made the case under no tenure on history as to how healthcare, housing, property taxes risen as rapidly as we've seen over the past decade here. And they said there's one through one to all of that. And it's Republican government.
I would say a super majority. Yeah. Yeah, again, we can bring all the. You want to go through all the things that we've offered that have been turned down over these 10 years. I think it'll tell a very good story. I'm happy to have that conversation. I just think they're wrong.
If it's about the results, then what does that say?
Well, we've had a majority of one party in both bodies over the same 10 years. I would say it should be some, they thought they could fix everything. They had the opportunity to do so, right? They didn't fix it. They say it's as bad as it is. I think then they should be pointing, and when they're pointing the finger at me, looking back at them, there's 3 other fingers pointing back at themselves. So again, I just reject it.
To be clear, Governor, just to clarify, getting back to the budget for a second, if the budget were to land on budget and the yield bill were to land on your desk as it's today, would you veto those?
As is
Coming out of the House. Sorry.
Oh, yeah.
What do you make of the? Sorry, go ahead. Go after you.
Specifically regarding the one-time funds, I spoke to the chair of House Appropriations, and she said that, in particular, that some of that 20 million that was identified would help those who no longer have insurance, based on the Affordable Care Act subsidy. Just speaking directly to what that money is going to apply, it should be going to other sources. I mean, I think there's good intention.
Yeah, no, again, it's budgeting because it needs. We had to go through hundreds of millions of dollars worth of requests, things that we thought were important, and we had to dial those back in order to come up with a budget that fits in within our needs and tries to satisfy some of the wants. But I think the budget we presented with those parameters reflects the reality we're in. And it's a realistic budget.
What do you make of the decision this afternoon or this morning from the Vermont Labor Relations Board regarding the return to office order?
Disappointing, but not surprised. Understanding the makeup of the board.
What do you mean?
Well, I mean, it's all weighted towards labor. I mean, it's the Labor Relations Board. It's all, I make some appointments, but there's some guardrails that don't give us many choices. So we'll ask for a stay and we'll appeal it.
What's the process on that?
I think it's through, maybe I should ask the attorney, but I think we would appeal it to the appeal to the Supreme Court.
Right, yes, we feel this. So it's procedurally required. Procedurally, we're required to give notice to the board. We've asked the board for a stay. I believe that the director is leaving the country for 3 weeks, so that we may or may not hear. And if we don't hear, or if they say no, we've already filed a notice of appeal in the Supreme Court, the AG's office, and we'll be asking the Supreme Court for a stay.
Is this part of a pattern decision? The LRB that you have issues with and talk about some of the other decisions that they've made that you find problematic?
I think I would say it's definitely part of the pattern. The only thing I can remember, because I don't know if you remember this, there was an appointee that the governor made to the BLRB, maybe it's about 7 years ago now, who was a neutral appointee to the board. The union was so opposed to the appointment that they showed up at the confirmation hearing, and essentially the Senate did not confirm that appointee. And in the interim, between her appointment and the confirmation, she voted on, I believe it was a union agreement, a settlement agreement, in a way that was disfavored by the union, and it was tremendously controversial. And I think it has never happened again. I guess that's what I would say there. But I can't speak to very, very specific. I know that negotiating bargaining happens every 2 years. And that's fair. That's a fair process.
And so the argument for balance or the result of what if going forward?
I think the legislature can fix it at some point, but it's not going to be fixed overnight. I'm just thinking about the focus on that this year, but sure they apply on that balance forward.
And just practically, what does this decision mean? I mean, there's a lot of state employees that have been hanging on this decision, people living out of state, et cetera. I mean, what does this mean in the short term?
Well, people will get to stay, so we'll continue to do what we're doing. But some of what I haven't read in depth, but there'd be like restitution for community, maybe for childcare, for all kinds of things associated with the return to office, which taxpayers will pay. Anything else?
Yeah, I'll just say that it's a 60-page brief, so we are obviously continuing to digest it while we explore the next steps. Our goal is to ensure that state government is able to deliver services to Vermonters that they expect. Our goal in the interim is to abide by what the order is, but to also make sure that our employees have the information that they need so that we can maintain operations and avoid chaos as much as possible.
All right, we'll switch over to the phones now. David, Compass Vermont.
Thank you. No questions today.
Thanks, Tom. Keith Whitcomb, Rutland Herald.
Hi, I'm just curious, between the House and Senate, like, who do you think you get further with, just in your conversations with them about what you want to see in the budget? Like, like maybe they're both the same, I don't know, just wondered.
Well, we want to give obviously the Senate the opportunity to see all the information, and we'll make suggestions and see where we go from there. But, I'm not weighing one against the other. The opportunity this is with the Senate.
Thank you.
Tim, Vermont Biz.
No questions. Thank you.
Paul, Boston Globe.
I also do not have a question at the moment.
Dr.
Governor, you had signed on to a joint statement with other doing what governors now pursuing, not pursuing, but like looking into nuclear and encouraging energy offices to look into nuclear. Can you tell me a bit why you signed on to that? I guess what you're hoping to track as those conversations.
I've long been a supporter of nuclear energy. You go back to my days in the Senate. I was one of, I think, 4 who voted in opposition, shutting down one, 2 Democrats, 2 Republicans. And because I thought that process was flawed. But having said that, I just think it's part of the answer. It's cardless. We need more energy. We have aging facilities. We rely heavily on other Canada and so forth that supplies with energy. I think nuclear, and this thing start with me, started with other New England states with Democratic governors. So especially, I think, Connecticut. He put this forward. We talked about it, we've been talking about it over the last probably year or so. And we all felt supportive of that.
We're soon going to be also renegotiating our rates with Hydro-Quebec. I believe, I don't know if Commissioner Johnson's on the call, but what do you expect that process to look like? And I've heard some rumblings of folks that work in the space of worried about politics seeping into this and affecting our rates.
Is Carrick on?
Yeah.
Carrick, is that something you want to try and answer? Without turning.
Thank you, Governor. I think that was Calvin, if I heard the voice correctly. Actually, first of all, I would say to set the baseline expectation, energy has always been hyper political. There's two things that fundamentally go on: politics and the physics of the energy grid. You can understand where they're aligned, it works, and where they're not, they're misaligned. In terms of predicting right now the outcome and how those negotiations will go, I think it's way premature. We don't even sure what the latest round of tariffs and the impacts. I think under Governor Scott's leadership, we have continued to invest where we can to make the relationship aspect of this work, even as other opportunities arise. And to the governor's point, that's why nuclear comes in. The greater number of choices we have, the greater number of options we have, the lower the cost of ultimately the choice we have to make for energy source. The fewer the options, the higher the cost. So I would come close to hazarding a guess as to predict or project exactly what happens with HQ. I hope that, and I believe the governor, well, I won't speak for the governor. I believe that we hope that Hydro-Quebec continues to play a strong role in our energy future. There's some investments that have been made, investments that could be made that would benefit Vermont ratepayers from continuing investments, and they've been an incredible partner. So we'll see, Calvin. No real predictions at this time.
Stepping down. Hydro-Quebec a great partner for Vermont throughout many decades. Started before government. So again, they're a part of our sources. Regardless of how we feel about nuclear, that's not going to happen anytime soon. So still need those partners.
Governor, you announced a replacement for Chris Taylor, but it's been a couple weeks since her resigned.
We received names from Milton sooner than we did from Burlington. So we have names from there. We've had others forward to us, Democrats from Burlington. So we are actively going through that. Something to speak very, very soon. I talked about it yesterday.
Given there's been some other taxation ideas out there, I know we talked about specifically tax, and also, freezing property tax. Topics of discussion. Way you want to weigh in on these sorts of ideas?
Again, I think I've been pretty clear. We don't need more taxes. So that, and the way to attract more taxpayers is by raising taxes. So we're clear there. Some of the other, we have a balanced budget that I believe reflects the needs of Vermont, and hopefully they'll see the same about a 7% property tax is going to be beneficial to
Your thoughts on the Senate legislation is now that would increase access.
I'm not familiar with that at this point. I don't know where it went.
What was the question?
S220?
Yeah. The FFM threshold useful
Yeah, I can say,
strategy to.
I delivered my letter on the budget to Senator Pertwee today. In that letter, it does uh, indicate our support of that bill and wanting to work with the Senate and the House on moving that forward. I think as you look, talking about $105 million to provide property tax relief, which is really a bridge structural transformation. Money parts of that puzzle together.
Was this one? This was the road. The roads, yeah. Or from Hardwick, socket. I've been supporting. But there's no bridge. Right? Sure there is. It's always where there's a will, there's a way. I've seen a lot of things. Session. I still think there's a natural. Which this general assembly. Put together what we've been doing.
Governor, can you talk a little bit about wetlands rules? I think there was in your executive order on housing, it sort of alleviated some of the buffer zone. I think there was language attached to the miscellaneous A&R bill that didn't get over the finish line. What do you see as the impact being that?
Yeah, that for process. Charles is here. If you could give him on that.
Thank you, Calvin. I think you're probably bringing this up in the context of Representative Putin's, 632. That's our agency's miscellaneous bill. We put those forward every year. His amendment would have essentially throttled down wetlands protections in less than 3% of the state. Notably, it would have very prospect-based development at 34 units. Wetlands provide water storage as an essential function. The attempted amendment by President would have had a minimal environmental detrimental impact, and I think that's kind of where we're at this point. What's in the public good? And I think that probably would have been public good. I think I'm also pretty concerned about precedent where no miscellaneous agency bill can forward if it's germane to wetlands. It's the second year in a row where we've had our miscellaneous bill table because it was germane to wetlands and volume wasn't willing to vote on amendments. So that's really where my primary concern is. Conversation around this.
Follow up maybe for the governor, but what my understanding is the Flood Safety Act, I believe you let go into law without your signature, I think, sets into motion more protections and a framework in where we want to encourage wetlands and of development away from the wetlands. How do you square that law's passage with your concerns about housing and affordability?
You can have both. There are areas, there are wetlands that should never be built. I think that's where because some said, well, everything, all the development, building and all the wetlands. There are some that are on the fringes just because of what qualifies to determine whether it is really a wetland or not. From our standpoint, I struck the balance. I believe that we can have both. What about less stringent wetland rules? What we need in terms of housing.
Yeah, and I think it's important to note that both the governor and CEO and Representative Booth's amendment would have hit the municipal areas. We're kind of concentrating on I think
Also notably within miscellaneous bill deficit was day pushes for Act 121, so those would have went for this bill income. And the reason the agency was interested in those is just to ensure the public is properly for all the potential impacts on development. They don't want to repeat 181 scenarios. They want
What really, last question, what happened? I mean, why didn't the state crossover?
would strongly encourage you to speak to majority leadership on that. I think it was probably to a point over on something that might have been supported. That's me speculating though.
Last night at the joint process, there's a lot of pricing first grade drag across. What is your response on that? Description people did, how they see some.
Yeah, again, I look forward to some of the plot camera footage. So, pretty big story. After action. Now, but it takes time. I want to be sure that, right. I don't know if, Commissioner Morris is. Jen, do you
I
want
am.
to add to that?
Thank you, yes, sir. I think we should, at this point, let the process of the abstraction review play out. I can react to last night's commentary by saying that, I appreciate that there is a lot of very strong feelings from the folks who took the time to come forward and share their story. And my team and I would like to take some time to process it and let it percolate. As we have said repeatedly since this event, we have a robust internal affairs process, and we invite people to make complaints, to provide statements to our investigator who answers directly to me so that we can evaluate if enough information exists to commence an internal affairs investigation. So there are avenues for folks to bring their complaints to us. And we, again, I appreciate that there was a lot of very strong feeling. And I think that the gravity of what I heard last night deserves some reflection and some time before I give you much more of a response.
Commissioner, just to follow up, I know that when you had testified that a lot of the responses that you guys had received were anonymous. Are you receiving more responses that are named or not anonymous, or is that still the same right now?
We, as far as I know, as of this morning, we have received only one other complaint with a name and contact information, a person who is willing to engage in the internal affairs process. And that is not sufficiently down the path yet for me to know. It has not been presented to me for a decision whether or not to open an internal affairs investigation, but I am aware that there's at least one person who has come forward with contact information and engaged with the investigator. But at this point, that is it.
Governor, I think today also, April 1st marks the end of the cold weather rules for the hotel program for general assistance. Yesterday, anti-homelessness advocates were calling for an extension of these rooms, but specifically, they would like to see it's either 34 or $43 million that we received from a Medicaid waiver, 1115 Medicaid global commitment waiver, which allows potentially for paying for folks' housing. Do you know anything about this, or have you heard anything about that waiver?
I'm not aware of that. Obviously, discussions about federal assistance for quite some time. So, expect to cut down so-called. And that hasn't set well with many. It's not. So, we think we're progressing in this area, not setting up for shelter. right. Set up number four, that are going to be online. So I still believe that's the right approach.
And I guess what would you say to the folks that I think BT Digger might have had some reporting this week about people that are losing housing, medically compromised, and apparatus to breathe electronically, but they'll be living in a tent. What do you say to folks that say that the shelter network that we're trying to bring online just isn't coming online?
But some could go to shelter, but I understand. But they choose not to because of alcohol, drugs, or pets. That's well, so emergency shelter is available, but again, Commissioner Hawk.
Yeah, that's correct, Governor. But they can reach out to 211 if they, or their caseworkers for specific help in their situations, but everything you said is true. That there could be shelter options, they may choose not to engage or go to the shelter.
Commissioner, are you able to shed any light on that Medicaid waiver as well? I think it was granted in October of last year.
I believe Secretary Samuelson is on and should be more appropriate to answer.
Thank you, Calvin. The Medicaid waiver that we have, the 1115 waiver covers the entirety of the Medicaid program overall. What we received last year was authorization to build a program, so not specific to any specific issue, to build a program that could supplement some of the rent for 6 months for Medicaid. Vermont's still working on a program that would be structured and would look at additional guidance from the federal government. There's been, as we all know, significant changes at the federal level, what they would approve and not approve. But the waiver provides the authority, not the funding or the required infrastructure to implement the program. The state would need to put upfront significant investments, including enrolling housing providers, landlords, developing and billing, and setting up IT systems. These steps require both time and significant state resources. Because we're still in the planning phase of the program, there's no money in the current budget to provide the state match, because while the federal government has the authority, we both have to build a program they will approve, and we have to have state dollars that would fund the other more than the other half of the program. So this program doesn't provide a viable option this year. It is possible in the future that we could explore and look into using Medicaid funds for housing supports, but it is also unlikely that that would continue past the existence of the current waiver. So the state needs to focus in the immediate term on more sustainable strategies that we've talked about, like shelter development and strengthening connections of services that support long-term housing options. So at this point, it's not an immediate or a viable option to use the 1115 waiver.